The interesting thing
Oh,
about my concussion was in the race, I didn't realize I was concussed. I didn't learn that till after the fact. The reason I stopped, I crashed at about 30 miles in and I didn't pull out until about 140 miles in. And the reason I pulled out of the race was because my knee hurt so bad. It wasn't because I was concussed.
hmm.
And then the concussion symptoms were really clear a few days later, which was also scary. So I kept going for 100 miles, and it was the knee pain that actually caused me to pull the plug.
Hmm. Yeah. This is, let's take some time to talk about concussions in particular and injuries. I think that it dovetails well with these, like, because there are a lot of amateurs taking on this event too. And it's important to keep these things in mind. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Hannah, this is more or less like what were your degrees actually in school? What did you study?
Yeah, I have 2 degrees. One is in exercise science, but then the other one that's really coming into play here is athletic training. So I'm a certified and licensed athletic trainer, which for those who don't know, that's a healthcare profession. We evaluate, prevent, and rehab injuries. So concussion is something that we're trained to evaluate. We're trained to help people return to play through it. We're trained, we're athletic trainers are often the first person on the scene to evaluate that concussion. My professor actually that taught me a lot of this stuff in college, one of his kind of side gigs was I went to college in St. Louis, and when the Rams were still in St. Louis, one of his jobs was he would be at the Rams games and sit in this special spot and watch for concussion mechanism. And then he would radio down to the field and say, hey, I just saw this concussion mechanism. You need to evaluate this player. And so there's a lot of strategies in place nowadays for concussion because we've learned that they're really complicated and it's really important to catch them.
Yeah. What could you share on them with us, whether it's like coming into how to recognize them, like you talked about, or even how to treat them? And clearly you probably the disclaimer that she's not your doctor in this case, and it's good to work with a doctor, but still, what would you share with us?
Yeah. There's a lot of scientific data that is always changing and evolving. So I think what I'm trying to present is just the most common scientific thoughts behind it. So I think the first thing that can really help people change the way they view concussion is to understand that the root of the word concussion means to shake or to shake violently. That's the Latin root. So that means that concussion can happen from a direct or indirect blow to the head. So that means you can be hit with something like a ball can hit you. You can hit your head on something like the ground, or you can hit nothing and you can just experience a violent shaking. So like whiplash or something like that. It's significant. Concussion is considered a mild traumatic brain injury. And actually in 2009, we eliminated the grading of concussion. So that means doctors still do because I think it helps people understand, but technically speaking, we no longer say, oh, you have a mild concussion. You're either concussed or you're not. So that means when we took away that grading in 2009, that means that all concussions should be treated equal once they're evaluated. And so that kind of gave us a better way to help people go through this process. So the other thing that's really important to understand with concussion is that concussion is a functional disturbance of the brain. It is not a structural disturbance to the brain. So what actually happens with concussion is your brain experiences an altered ionic balance and an altered metabolism. So the best analogy I've ever heard for this is it's like your brain is a snow globe and you shake it up and all of that snow goes everywhere. And now it's fuzzy. Nothing in that snow globe is physically damaged. You don't see any damage, but it's all kinds of confused. And so that's a great analogy for what's happening in your brain is concussion. And so that means it's not a bruise to the brain. If you opened up, your skull and looked at it, you probably wouldn't see anything. And that's why when we do, people say like, oh my gosh, you might be concussed. You should go get an MRI. You should go get a CT scan. You're not going to see the concussion on those things. It doesn't mean you shouldn't go get one, because when we get those imaging, it helps us rule out things like brain bleeds, epidural, subdermal hemorrhages, which can show up immediately or days and weeks later if it's a slow bleed. So you should get evaluated. You should look for those things. But if you're wondering, do I have a concussion? An MRI is not that proof. I'll hear people say, oh, I got an MRI, there was nothing there, so I'm fine. No, that doesn't mean that you're fine. I also hear a lot, you'll do the H sign. So follow the finger with your eyes. Oh my gosh, they didn't even do that. They didn't evaluate me for a concussion. You don't have to have eye tracking issues or nystagmus or pupillary issues to have a concussion. Those are just tools that we can use to help rule in or rule out. But if you're experiencing enough of the symptoms for concussion, then we might not even have to do that to already say you are concussed. So some of the symptoms for concussion, I just want to run through them really fast and highlight a few. Is symptoms include headache, pressure in the head, neck pain, nausea, dizziness, blurred vision, balance, sensitivity to light, sensitivity to noise, feeling slowed down, feeling in a fog, just don't feel right, difficulty concentrating, difficulty remembering, fatigue or low energy, confusion, drowsiness, trouble falling asleep, more emotional, irritability, sadness, nervousness, and anxiousness. I think a lot of those are very,
Why are you laughing?
Yeah.
I got 100% of those.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And when you have 100% of them, it's like, boom, check mark, concussed, done, like hole in one. But I think it can also be really confusing when you only have a few of them and you're still concussed in that case. And so some of the ones I want to point out, balance, that's a great time when you should have a pre-exam. So there's a lot of ways that you can go and get a baseline for what your balance is, because everyone's balance is different. If you have trouble standing on one leg with your eyes closed, well, maybe you already had that. So that's a really good one where you want a baseline for it. Ones that you don't need a baseline, feeling in a fog and just don't feel right. Those are two of my really favorite, if there are favorite symptoms, because that's what I hear more than anything. It's like, well, I don't know. I'm not really dizzy. Like I'm not nauseous, but I just don't feel right. And I think that's really confusing for anyone who hasn't had a concussion, but when you've had one, you know what that means. Amber, you probably have something.
Yeah. I just want to share, because this is really resonating with me in my experience with the concussion that I had after Unbound. I had a lot of these symptoms early on, and then a lot of those symptoms went away. But the one that persisted was, I just don't feel right. And it was, as an athlete who's trained myself to override a lot of those, uncomfortable sensations. And okay, I feel uncomfortable. I just got to keep going. To have that sensation of, I just don't feel right. It was really hard to stop and say, okay, I actually need to listen to this, because it is very subtle. It's not like I have knee pain, I have shoulder pain, my hand is in a splint. It's not visible, it's not obvious, but it's so, so, so important to trust. And that was the interesting thing, because that persisted for a long time. And it took me a while, because, once the sensitivity to light went away, the sensitivity to noise, like the really obvious things went away, I, for a little while, thought, oh, I'm good. But then I realized that actually I just don't feel right. And that was the thing that actually prompted me to go see a specialist. And he validated that right away. He's like, that's the most common thing I hear is, I just don't feel right, but it's a really, really important one. And I love that you're highlighting that.
In a situation where you aren't, because the irony of all this is when you're concussed, you might not even be in a spot to evaluate yourself to figure these things out. Right.
Yes.
But there are some real signs that something is wrong. What would those be, Hannah?
Yeah. I want to highlight that what you just said is, when you have a concussion, you're not in a spot to evaluate yourself. And that's something, I need to say for myself as well, because being trained in this, a lot of the time I'm like, check, okay, fine. But in that list, you're more emotional and you're more irritable also, or can be when you have a concussion. In fact, when I worked with the football team, when we told a player they had a concussion, one of the first things we would do is we would take their helmet away. One, so they didn't try and sneak back in the game, but also because more than once, the players would get so frustrated that they would actually try and hit the person telling them they couldn't go back in the game with their helmet, because they're just not in their right mind and they're frustrated. And so you can't try and evaluate yourself. You come up with excuses like, well, I have a headache. Well, I didn't have coffee this morning, so it's probably fine. You need someone objectively to do that. So get evaluated. Even if it's just from the medic at the race, they can really help you know, is this an emergency? Is this not an emergency? And help you at least take that next step. If you don't, if you're like, hey, I know I'm concussed, whatever. I don't want to go into whether or not you should go into the ER or into urgent care. That's a decision that you need to make on your own or with a medical professional. But reasons you should go to the ER for sure, I think, are a lot easier to state. And that's reasons to seek immediate medical attention in the ER is decreasing consciousness, increased confusion, increasing irritability, loss of consciousness, numbness in the extremities, repeated vomiting, unequal pupils, slurred speech, worsening headache, and if you cannot recognize people. And if you notice with most of these things, it's all about a change. So it's increasing or decreasing levels of alertness or symptoms. And that's often a sign of a brain bleed. It's because things are declining inside of you. And so you really want to be aware of that and be aware of it in the long term as well, because like I said, some brain bleeds happen immediately. Some brain bleeds happen over the course of days and weeks. And so if this is occurring, don't write it off as like, that happened a week ago. That can't be this. It can be. So take it seriously.
It's always really good to remind yourself to err on the side of caution with this too, because so first of all, you might just be super confused and think you know what's going on, but you don't. I remember at single track 6, when I came to and I was on the middle of a bridge somewhere and I was like, I have no clue where I am. I have no clue what day it is. I have no clue what anything is. And then within, I don't know, some sort of time period after that, I was like, no, it's Sunday. And I'm in Canada, so I'm fine. Like I got it dialed. And then I remember they asked me at the tent, they're like, what day is it? Everything else. And I was like, it's Sunday. And they're like, it's Wednesday. And then I was certain that I was fine. I had rationalized myself out of it. I was like, yeah, I guess I don't remember anything before this, but I'm fine. Like we're just so far out of ourselves that even though we might recognize some of these signs, the ones that are more serious, you might be tempted to rationalize yourself right out of assuming that you have a concussion, or you've had enough experience with these that you may be able to recognize this as well. So regardless, it's always key to make sure that you're going to find medical personnel and work with them. But if you feel like you have one, don't second guess that, just pursue that and go and talk to a medical professional. If you don't feel like you've had one, but you recognize any of these symptoms, still pursue a medical professional. It's just worth it. Coming from a person that's had way too many of these, it's absolutely worth it. Nate.
John's had 8.
8. Yeah, it's a lot.
8.
Like too many, over the course of whether it's motocross, skiing, and I guess bikes have only given me 1 that I know of. So, but it's a lot.
They are all different. So if you've had one concussion, you've had one concussion. It doesn't mean that the next one is going to present in the same way. It might feel completely different. So if you are in doubt whatsoever, I think it's safe to assume that you are and to seek medical attention just in case.
Mm-hmm.
When I had mine in the at Cape Epic and the medic on the trail, which was so lucky to see one on the trail, right? He did the eye test, and so it's Hannah, it's eye stagnus. Is that what it's called when you look to the side and your eye then tracks?
Nystagmus. Mm-hmm.
Nystagmus.
When it kind of shakes on the side.
Yep.
It's
that
scary.
can also happen if someone is drunk. So I'm going to do this to my
Yes.
kids as they come home at night. But yeah, so that shakes. And then they did the light in my pupils and they both reacted, but they were very slow to react. And that was also another sign. Like they put the light in and then it would wait and then it would go in rather than normally it would just go down. So then they would check me in the ambulance to what Hannah said. They kept checking the same things to see what, if things were getting worse. And then the person would keep talking to me to see if I would I knew she was doing this to I was aware enough for that, but to see if like she would ask me things about my home and that sort of stuff, but in a regular conversation. So not to alarm me, just to see like, is this person have a brain bleed and is he progressively getting worse?
Yes.
But anyways, what you said, like, if you're not a medical professional, just get your friend to a doctor. It's way better than like you trying to be like, oh, they're probably okay. They remember this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned that as well. If you were aware that it was happening, is another thing is concentration in that list is some of the tests we do, it would be say the months of the year backwards, starting in August. So pick a random point and go backwards, or count backwards from 100 by 7. So 193, blah, blah, blah. It's not about how fast you can do it. It's about, can you concentrate enough to make it happen? So I've experienced giving people these tests where their response is, oh, I can't do this when I'm not concussed. Great. I don't care how long it takes. You can do it on your fingers. Can you do it? No, I can't. I can't do that even when I'm lucid. It's like, well, can you concentrate? And a lot of the time with someone who's concussed, they're not willing to give that effort. And so, yeah, I just want to point that out, because it's not about how fast you can do some of these things. It's about if you're willing to give that concentration, to put that out in your brain. Yeah.
One of the symptoms that Jonathan,
Please,
I think
Amber,
we've got a lag today. There's just something going on today.
What's going on? I'm just going to stop. Go ahead, Amber.
One of the weird things that I had happen was after I went to see a specialist, we started doing some testing, and we actually looked at my reading comprehension, which was a lot worse than I thought it was. And they were asking me if I had been avoiding reading. And I was like, no, definitely not. But then they asked how much I'd read in the past few months. And without being aware of it, I had avoided reading because it had become really difficult to track a straight line across without dropping down lines at the end of it. And I was having to reread the same line over and over again in order to comprehend what it was that was on the page. I wasn't aware that was happening until somebody pointed it out to me. And I stepped back and thought, whoa, actually, I devour books most of the time, but I haven't touched one. I haven't even looked at magazines in several months now, and it hadn't even occurred to me.
Interesting. What about returning back to like training or back to activity in sport?
Yeah, I think that's where, erring on the side of caution is always the right answer. So the first thing I want to bring up is not to scare you, but it's also to scare you into making the right decision is, the thing that medical professionals are often most afraid of when allowing someone to return to sport is something called second impact syndrome. And so this happens when you experience one concussive blow, and then before those symptoms are gone, you experience another concussive blow. And what can happen in that case is things get so confused in your brain that essentially, without going into it, it's almost like the wires get crossed and your brain doesn't know what to do, and things start dilating and constricting to the point that you have diffuse cerebral swelling. So your brain in this circumstance could just start swelling uncontrollably to the point where you don't make it through the event. You die. And so this really can be a life or death situation. And when we're talking about, something like football, yeah, okay, definitely don't go back in because you are going to get hit again. When you talk about something like cycling, people get a little, they're willing to risk it more. It's like, oh, what are the odds that I'll crash again? Well, they're a lot higher since you have a concussion, because your balance is compromised, your focus is compromised, your emotions are compromised. So the decisions that you're making now are worse than they would be normally. So if your chance of crashing on the bike, is normally whatever amount, it's now higher, because whether you're on the mountain bike and you're not tracking the trail, or whether you're on the road and you're crossing someone's wheel because you're just not in it, you are increasing your risk, and that risk can literally be life or death. So that is one reason that you need to be cautious returning to sport. And there's a whole protocol that I'd like to briefly run through. But before that, I also want to talk about something called post-concussion syndrome, which is a pretty common something that people talk about commonly. I've heard recently that they're trying to get rid of that language and just call it concussion with prolonged symptoms, to help get rid of some of the stigma around the word syndrome. But regardless, if you push a concussion, it can prolong the time that it takes to recover. And in the moment, it can feel like, I mean, gosh, Nate, like, I traveled all the way to South Africa. Like, I really just want to finish this race. I'll be fine. I can experience these symptoms a little bit longer. Like, thank goodness you made the right decision and pulled out, because no one knows what a little bit longer is in these situations. Mm-hmm. It can be months, it can be years, and everyone's experience is going to be a little bit different as well. That's why it's a syndrome, because we don't know all of the surrounding events. Depression is often associated with concussion, things that can be really hard to live with on a day-to-day basis. So, and all that to say also is post-concussion syndrome doesn't only happen when you push a concussion. It can happen just in general for unlucky circumstances, but you're certainly not helping your odds if you're pushing yourself. And I think there's also a lot of statistics about, if you experience a concussion, you're more likely to experience another concussion and all of those things. And there's honestly, we don't know all of the information behind that. And quite frankly, that's more of the reason to be cautious. So all of that to be said, kind of the 7-day, there's a 7-day return to play guidelines that's pretty widely used. And so the first thing I want to say is there's a lot of science that goes into this. And now they're saying some smaller things, some things like you can get back to some small cognitive tasks earlier, or you can exercise very lightly earlier. And they've shown that some of these very easy things can actually help with recovery. I only recommend doing that if you're under the care of a medical professional and physician, because what we view as light is very different most of the time than what a medical
sub-thresholds were good.
views as light.
VO2 was only, it was 30/30s. It wasn't 5-minute VO2.
Exactly. So that's why I'm hesitant to even say that, but I know so many people listen to this podcast that I feel like I should just say it so that someone doesn't raise their hand and say, actually, now the science, yes, I'm aware, but I think caution is always better. So that to be said, the 7-day standard return to play is that each day you can progress to the next activity if you don't have any symptoms with that activity. If you do have symptoms with that activity, you go back to the previous one until you don't have symptoms. So that means from the moment you get a concussion until the time you can return back to full activity is pretty much a week standard. If you don't have if you don't have to go backwards at all, if you're asymptomatic the next day. So that's like best case scenario. So it's best usually when you get a concussion to just let go of your plans and to be aware that they're going to be fluctuating, changing. So the first day after a concussion, nothing. You're just resting. You're just letting your body heal itself. If you feel good, if you don't have symptoms, next day you can do light aerobic activity. So they classify that as less than 75% of max heart rate. I like to put this into cycling terms of you can spin on the trainer with little to no resistance. So just keep it super easy, spin on the trainer, move your body. If you have no symptoms, the next day you can do non-contact activity or activity in which you don't have any risk of contact. So I consider that to still be on the trainer. But now you can do a little bit more work. You can do a harder trainer ride. You can get your heart rate going. You can get your body moving. Day 4, you can do sport with others that's still mostly non-contact. So I consider that going out and you're riding with a friend. Something could happen, but it probably won't. You're forcing your brain to think. You're maybe doing some like pace line work or something like that with a friend. Day 5 is considered unrestricted. So I would put that as a spirited group ride. This is where there is risk involved, but maybe there's no prize where you're wanting to risk it. And then day 6 is full return to play. So that's when I think you could finally return back to the start line if you feel ready to. Once again, if you have symptoms on that, you go back a day. So just because you have this list doesn't mean, okay, I raced on Saturday, next weekend my race is on Sunday, so I'm good to go. That's only if every single step works out perfectly, which I hope it does. But just please be very cautious.
It's 3 months later for me and I still have symptoms, just to know. So that some people might be like, Hannah said in 7 days, I can race next week's crit. But this is, Hannah, you said this is only if you have no symptoms, correct?
Right. This is each one that you progress to, you're asking yourself, I think the biggest thing is usually when you start incorporating the activity. So when you go from, I'm doing nothing, I feel fine, now I'm going to ride the trainer. It definitely inspires symptoms. You get that heart rate up and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, the room is spinning. Nope, you're done. You go back a step. And you don't get to progress until you don't have symptoms from that.
Yeah, I've never had 7 days recovery from a concussion. It takes a long time to get, and like Amber said, they're always different. There were times with one of them, I think I went like a year or two where I was extremely sensitive to light changes. Like it was, if somebody turned out the lights, I'd be like, okay, for 10 minutes, I'm just going to live in pure darkness. Like, wow, and it took so long to be able to adapt. And then I've had other ones where just extremely emotional thereafter, whether it was experiencing high highs and low lows, but I had no control over emotions. They're just always different. And I'm going to reinforce what Hannah said. When she says next day, she's saying next day after you get to the point where you have accomplished that step in this 7-day return to performance like protocol that we have there. So this is you just have to take time, and really like what you said of throw your plans out the window, because your health matters more than whatever plans you had for sport, for sure.
If you like this video, make sure you give us a thumbs up.
If you didn't like this video, you can give it a thumbs down, but let us know what you would have done differently in the comments below.
If you want to see more of these videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you want to become a faster cyclist, check out TrainerRoad.com.
Do it.